I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.
Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Okay, so last week, Haley shared her method for playing with trends in a way that's authentic to you and your personal style. So just to recap what we talked about last week, we talked about defining 2 things to help you filter through trends and adjust them to your own style. First, style identity, which are basically just a few words that help you broadly define your style. And then brand icons, which are the specific elements that you incorporate over and over into your wardrobe. So those are kind of a couple tools that you can use as filters for the trends that you see out there so that you can bring in some trends, bring in some freshness to your wardrobe while still feeling like it's you. So we wanted to follow up on that conversation by taking a look at some fall and winter 2023 trends. So this will be really fun. We're going to look at what's coming out for fall and see how maybe we would incorporate that into our own wardrobes. So I think this will be a really fun conversation. And if you haven't heard the previous episode, definitely go back and give it a listen. I think it'll set some really good context for this episode today for you. So let's start with our icebreaker, which is, Haley, what trend are you most looking forward to wearing this fall?
Ooh, I think that the trend that I'm most looking forward to is there's a real trend for, it kind of shows up in multiple ways for like tailored garments, specifically things that feel like a little exaggerated. I'm really excited about this. I want to make like a overcoat this winter, and I think it'll be a really fun place to like insert some inspiration.
Oh, overcoats are so practical.
Yeah.
You can just throw them over everything.
They naturally, like inherently feel like a little bit, exaggerated because of like the length of a typical overcoat. So it feels like a really great way to like, lean into that drama a little bit more, but still stay classic and true to my style.
That's a great one. Very wearable. Something that'll probably be in your wardrobe for a long time.
Yeah.
As well.
What about you? What are you looking forward to wearing?
Well, I was just looking at a pair of shoes this morning that I think are really trendy, but I think I would probably wear a lot. So they're a pair of, I like loafers. I love wearing loafers in the fall. I think they're just so classic and they go with everything. You can wear them with dresses. You can wear them with pants. They're really comfortable.
Yeah.
But I have a really beautiful pair of flat, really soft leather loafers, and I absolutely love them, but they just, like most flats, they get completely torn up at my house because we have a gravel driveway and dirt everywhere, and it's very muddy in the Pacific Northwest, and they just get destroyed. So I rarely wear them outside the house unless I'm going to be at work. So this is a pair of lug-soled loafers.
Oh, I have some too.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
And I just think they'd be really practical. Lug soles are like really trendy right now.
They are.
Again, it's like that 90s trend, the big platform, very, very chunky. But they look really comfortable, first of all.
Yeah.
They're patent leather, which makes them kind of impervious to mud, which is nice. You can wipe the mud off of them very easily.
Yeah.
And they, because of the platform, like there's a space between you and the ground, which I think is really good. Like a leather sole just won't work here. You need something big and chunky, I think. So the boots that I have that have a big chunky sole have served me very well. So they're super trendy, but I think I would probably wear them like every time I leave the house. So
yeah,
that's a good trend in my book.
Yeah, I say go for it. I bought mine last year and I love them. I wear them often.
Yeah, and they have kind of a 60s look to them too. Very, very early 60s, baby dollish in a way.
Yeah, mine are brown leather, and the lug sole is like a little bit like, it's not a huge platform on them, so they feel like a little like they have a classicness that works in my wardrobe.
Yeah,
I love the patent leather ones. So cute.
Yeah, I think patent leather is very, very practical in the winter. You wouldn't think so, but it is.
It is.
So if you have an icebreaker for a future episode, you can leave it for us. Any question that you have that you want us to use as an icebreaker, feel free to leave it. If you're a Steamwork member, just go to steamwork.com/go/icebreakers and share it there, and we will probably use it on a future episode. All right, so let's talk about trends. So anytime a new season rolls around, it just feels like every publication, every social media account out there is telling you what you should and shouldn't wear. And that can be, I don't know. I think most of us as sewers are probably pretty independent minded about such things. So it can be a little bit grating. But if you tuned into our last episode, you know that we think personal style is a lot more valuable than all the trend forecasts in the world combined. So personal style is first and foremost. But at the same time, trends can be fun to mix in. So today we're going to be sharing some trends that we're excited about for fall and winter 2023 and see how they might apply or not. And you can do the same. I think it'll be really fun. So let's get into it. Haley, what types of trends do you feel the most drawn to?
Well, typically the trends I feel most drawn to are things that are revisiting like past decades. I love like some vintage inspiration, which is why I think like I've loved a lot of the 90s stuff. I just think it's like really fun to revisit the hits of a decade.
Yeah. Some of it is.
Some of it is. Some of it is humbling. And then I would say another type of trend that I feel really drawn to is just like anything that explores like classic garment or a classic idea and kind of like flips it on its head or like plays with it a little bit more. I always find those just like really fun and interesting.
Yeah, I agree. For me, I think versatile trends are things that I'm drawn to. So things that you can play with and make your own.
Yeah,
I think are things that I'm really drawn to. Things that are trends that are practical. So I think those loafers that I just mentioned are a really good example. Like trends that I feel are wearable in my life personally. That's really, really important to me. So those are the trends that I tend to feel the most drawn to. Also things that have a certain sophistication to them, I think. I like some of more youthful trends on other people. I just think for myself, I like something that at least to me feels a little bit more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And works with my proportions and just makes me feel like me, basically.
Yeah. Do you have any criteria that a trend needs to meet in order to like make the cut, make it into your wardrobe?
I think those things I just mentioned, but also I think the primary thing is it going to last? Like, am I going to like this in 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Is it going to be something that I'm going to wonder why I ever had this thing? I think that's something that I try to think about before I purchase a trend, because I don't want to either spend a lot of money or just waste resources and time on things just because they're trendy. So I really try to think about the longevity. And I think that does go back to personal style.
Yeah.
So that's a big one for me. And then, as I mentioned, practicality is a big one for me. There are lots of trends that I think look awesome, but just I know I either won't wear them or they're just, I'll feel silly wearing them around in my life, you know? So I think those are the big ones for me. What about you?
I mean, kind of similar. I would say a main criteria would be, you know, what we discussed in the last episode is that it just like has to make sense with my style identity and like my, you know, signatures and icons that I use. And then another thing is that I just like can't feel costumey. Like it has to feel like real, not like a caricature of me. And then practicality as well. And that I feel like that comes into play with fabric a lot, where there's like lots of trends where I'm like, oh, I like that fabric, or but I just like doesn't make sense for me in my life. Speaking of which, is there a trend that you love but choose not to participate in because of your criteria?
I think there are probably quite a few. One thing that comes to mind is in the summer, like high-heeled sandals and things like that, like strappy beautiful high-heeled sandals that look so great with dresses.
Yeah.
Normally, I think I would, in the past, have worn those at least occasionally. I don't really have a use for them anymore, I don't feel like, or at least I feel like I would wear them so infrequently that it's not really worth it to me. Like I'd wear them maybe if I was going to a wedding or something like that, and that's about it. So those are the kinds of trends that I love them. I think they're beautiful. I just have to pass because it's just not something that I'd wear a lot.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things. What about you?
Well, one of the trends we'll be covering today has a big lingerie focus, and I love the way designers are utilizing like delicate sheer fabrics, like meshes and lace, and that's one of those things that it's kind of like I love the look of, but I choose not to indulge in it for two reasons. I would feel like I was wearing a costume if I was wearing those elements, and also like I would just snag the heck out of that fabric, and it would not work in my life of things needing to be laundered because I live with a grubby toddler.
Yeah.
And a cat.
Oh, if you think cats are dirty,
yeah,
get a puppy. I feel dirty all the time since I got my puppy.
Well, I think we can kind of dig into some of these trends. So first I want to talk about like how I like to view trends. Of course, last episode we talked about utilizing our style, identity and our icons to help us like kind of filter trends. But when I'm looking at trends, I'm often looking at the runway for my source of information. And this is really a great source because we're looking at like trends in their kind of purest form and their biggest, boldest form. And then from there, what I can do is I get to pick apart the components of the trend, because lots of times when you're looking at runway, it feels like, man, like who would wear that?
Yeah, this is cray.
Yeah, like this is not practical. But I think that like the real like meat lives in those components, in breaking down the trend into its individual components. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to look at the trend, and then we're going to look at the different components that make the trend. And you might find that something that sounds kind of like outlandish at face value, there might be a component for you that does fit in with your style identity and, complements your icons really well.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point. And just thinking about how might this work for me? Just keep an open mind. Maybe at first glance it doesn't, but if you have your own style in mind and you think about, okay, well, how might this possibly work for me, or what elements, or how can I pull in just a little bit of that to make it fun? I think that's a good way to look at trends.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so we're going to jump in with a risque one to start with. Ooh. A trend which I'm calling half dressed. And that's that lingerie trend that I was mentioning earlier. So again, at first glance, you might think like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be wearing like lingerie out to the grocery store, Haley. WTF. But when we pick apart this trend, we can see that the components of this trend are sheer fabrics, lace, hosiery. Hosiery is really big, even just like colorful, opaque tights this season. We saw like throughout lots of runway shows. Visible undergarments. So this can be like utilizing those sheer fabrics, or it could also be like a peekaboo bra strap, boning, or things seaming that kind of like alludes to the idea of boning, underwire, and then slips. So there's like elements of this that are definitely like more wearable, more tame than others. Like a slip dress or a camisole, for instance, is might be something you already have in your wardrobe that fits into this trend really well. So I think that by picking it apart, we can like remove the shock value of the runway and see like how it could be digestible and wearable for you.
Yeah. And I think also thinking about what you already own that might fit into it and maybe you could wear a little bit differently is a great way to get more from what you already have rather than thinking about how do you add more to what you already have. So just as you were talking, I was thinking about I have this silk camisole with lace at the top that I haven't worn in quite a long time, just like a very simple black camisole, and it fits perfectly into this. And I feel like I can already think about how I could incorporate that into my fall wardrobe and get more use out of it.
Yeah. For me, I think about like hosiery. I'm like I love opaque tights. I like will take any excuse to wear them. So I'm like, I think I should like dig those out of the the depths of my drawers. Also, I think slips are like really wearable camisoles.
Yeah.
And even though there's elements of this trend that I just don't feel like fit into my personal criteria, those are things that I definitely could find inspiration in.
Lots of great options for layering too.
Yeah.
When I think slips, camisoles, hosiery, things like that, I think layers. I think, keeping warm, having extra layers underneath things like maybe a pretty camisole underneath a sheer sweater, for example, is absolutely gorgeous and can keep you warm at the same time.
Yeah, this one feels really like when you examine it and sit with it, it feels a lot more practical.
Yeah, actually, that's another thing I was thinking about making this fall and winter was knitting a sheer sweater, like a sheer fuzzy mohair sweater.
Oh, you need to do something that will go with the black camisole.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, the next trend we have, I'm calling it That's So Metal. And it is a trend that is about all things glitzy and metallic. So within this trend, we're seeing sequins, beading, metallic leather, lame fabrics, and then also like metallic trim as well, whether that's like a metallic cording or like something that's like a beaded type trim.
Very pretty. I just recently got a book after I did my video on embroidery. I did on the embroidered aims that I made. I got a book about beaded embroidery, and I really want to try something out that has beaded embroidery. So maybe this is my signal to do that.
Yeah, I think that this is a really fun one because I feel like metallics can really be incorporated in like any number of ways. So I just listed like 5 different ways that I saw it used on the runway, but that doesn't mean that you can't, do even like metallic thread for your embroidery, metallic top stitching thread, maybe some like glitzy buttons or zipper or some kind of element like that. I mean, I feel like you could really like play with this in any number of ways.
Yeah, definitely. I have some gold lame fabric that I bought a few years ago. It's been in my stash for quite a long time. And I just keep thinking like this fall, this winter, I'm going to use it. I'm going to make something with it, maybe for the holidays. And for some reason, it just never happens. So maybe this is the year that it's going to happen.
I would love to have a sequin dress. It's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know if I have an occasion to wear a sequin dress, but it definitely plants the seed of like, maybe next time I have an occasion. It's the year I make that dress.
I have this photo I pinned on Pinterest of Alexa Chung wearing a sequin mini skirt and then like a heathered gray slouchy t-shirt with it. And I just think it's so cool and wearable. I don't know where it would be wearable, but it just looks so cute and comfortable at the same time.
Yeah.
I love sequins. I think sequins are so fun. Just such a party,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that idea of styling it, kind of like styling it down a bit. I think that's a way to make it really wearable.
Yeah.
Okay, heading into our next trend, one that I'm really excited about, which is exaggerated tailoring. So this trend includes lots of tailored jackets, really strong shoulders. Sometimes the strong shoulder is created by the use of, a more statement style sleeve. Sometimes that strong shoulder is created by pretty heavy shoulder pads. Something else present throughout this trend is these exaggerated silhouettes are being balanced by a more neutral color palette. That doesn't mean that you have to do that, but in the trend itself, that was what I was observing. Lots of pinstripes, which was really interesting. I think drew a lot of attention to the lines of the silhouette and the broader shoulder in particular. And then just suiting fabrics in general. For me, in my life, I find this to be like a really fun one to play with because I love mixing in little tailored elements.
Yeah. Reminds me of, there's just this list of elements reminds me of Madonna circa Vogue, or Dick Tracy era, where she wore those big pinstripe suits with the really strong shoulders. Very cool. I like that. One thing, so maybe I could ask you this. So strong shoulders have been in for a little while. I feel like we've seen some stuff with shoulder pads. Me personally, I have broad shoulders to begin with. So what do you think about for somebody who maybe already has that physical feature? This is just an example. Other people, might be other physical features that are very in being emphasized. What do you think about the hesitation? I have some hesitation in wearing things with super strong shoulders because I feel like it just makes it even more obvious. Not that it's a bad thing. I love my shoulders, but I'm just, I always feel a little bit self-conscious about having huge shoulders.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in the example that you used, that if it's a trend that you feel like excited about using, I would say, you can utilize your own anatomy as the, the base of the shape you're creating. You may not need to add as like dramatic of shoulder pads as someone who has more sloping shoulders. You can use like sleeve heads instead, and then use fabric choice or something like pinstripes to really like enhance that silhouette. But I think that it's like a fun moment to like reframe it and like celebrate something that maybe you previously didn't feel like, I want to celebrate that,
Yeah. And I think it depends on how, because I do feel like an exaggerated sleeve or something that has a little bit more softness to it, I'm more comfortable with. But a really strong shoulder pad, I just feel like a little bit like a linebacker. Personally,
there's some trends throughout. There's a trend we're going to talk about later on about emphasis on the waist, and I feel like the shoulders and sleeves and drama and creating that really like dramatic, exaggerated silhouette also come into play. A lot of times these trends have like a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
So if the exaggerated tailoring portion of the big shoulders, big sleeve trend doesn't like feel authentic to you, then you can explore like what you said, like a really billowing sleeve.
Yeah. It is interesting what you just said, because I feel like, for example, in the 1980s, both small waists and big shoulders were very in. The 1950s, small waists and a broader, more tailored shoulder were very in. You think about like a Dior suit or something like that. So I think it's really interesting that these, seem to come in waves and they seem to come together. We're talking about sort of this emphasis on that hourglass shape, which I think is really interesting. It's coming from these different directions, but it's still present together.
Yeah, I think that's another really interesting thing about bringing a trend into its components is that then you can start to draw those comparisons a little bit more. And we're seeing kind of the pendulum swing a little bit. I think for a long time, the trend was for like a little bit like longer, leaner silhouette, or something like a little bit more slouchy. And right now it really seems like we're going towards like a little more structure and a little bit more hourglass look.
Yeah. I like both.
Yeah,
personally.
I agree. I like to mix it up with the silhouettes, but okay. And then the next one, again, a little bit of overlapping with the last, is one that you may have heard people buzzing about a little bit, and it's this quiet luxury trend. I didn't give this trend a snazzy name like I gave the others because I feel like this is very broadly recognized and talked about. And some of the components of quiet luxury is oversized layers, tailored outerwear, which kind of harkens back to that exaggerated tailoring trend. Wardrobe staples. I'm using air quotes because they're, staples according to who.
Yeah.
And then the other two things that I see really heavily influenced in quiet luxury is kind of like an equestrian type influence. And then also this kind of like Ivy League preppy influence as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think the equestrian influence in particular, I think is so classic. Like we were talking about loafers earlier today, the horse bit buckle on them. I love that. And I think you might not resonate with the term preppy, for example, you listening. But if you look at some of the elements of preppy style, they're very, very classic. So if you do feel like you want to dress in a more classic style, I think it's worth looking at things like the Ivy or preppy style for inspiration.
You can look at books like Take Ivy, which looks at Ivy League campuses and the preppy style. And what's really interesting about it is it's all about taking the same formulas, taking the same garments, and then wearing. It's more about how you're wearing the things. There's a really interesting podcast called Articles of Interest. In season 3, they go into preppy style. That's what it's all about. And it's so interesting. And by the end, you may be obsessed with preppy style. I don't know. Go listen and find out for yourself.
I think there's so much to take from preppy style. Like so much, like just really cool ideas and ways of wearing things. And the equestrian stuff too. I love that. What I like about this trend is that even though we're calling it a trend, it is something that if this is something that you pursue more for the season, you're going to be wearing these things probably for years and years. You're not going to get sick of these things.
Yeah.
Most likely. Unless it's completely outside of your normal style. Which if you've listened to our last episode, you probably won't choose it in that case. So I think it's definitely worth looking at. All right. The next one is one that Haley already mentioned, which is the return of the waist. So this one also has a lot of overlap with some of the things we've talked about already. So we talked about those big shoulders and how those can help kind of give the appearance of a smaller waist. So that's one element of it. We're also looking at things like corsetry and seamed bodices, which obviously has a lot of overlap with the lingerie style that we talked about earlier, the first one we talked about. Things that are very body conscious, belts. That's another thing from the 80s that I think really is making a comeback is belts that emphasize the waist and playing up the proportions of the shoulder, the bust, or the hip. So giving that contrast with the waist. And I think this is a really cool trend to incorporate if you're looking for more structure in the things you wear and you really enjoy emphasizing the structure of your body, emphasizing the waist, then this could be one for you. I personally, I don't know. I go back and forth. I like the structure and then I like the looseness. So I like a little bit of both.
The way that I like incorporating things like this, if you were someone who feels like a little more hesitant, is to incorporate it with your layers. This is something I do often, is that I have more like bodycon fitted layers, and then I have something slouchy or relaxed fitting over top to kind of bring in my personal style a little bit more.
Yeah. I personally feel like it's always a little bit of a gamble for me. Not a gamble, but I have to have the right shape for my body because I have very high waist and long legs, and I feel like too much emphasis on the waist, I just look like I have no torso whatsoever. So I think that's one thing. Like you just have to think about what you personally feel comfortable in, and what works for you. And I think a good way to do that is look at things that you've had in the past that you wear that feel good to you. Do they have a defined waist? Are there certain elements of that make you feel good when you wear them? And that's kind of what I do to figure out what proportions are gonna work well for me.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I think that instead of going for like the super fitted things, you could go with something with like the exaggerated sleeve
Mm-hmm.
or like a fuller skirt or something like that to like bring that influence and that bring the eye towards the waist without like having wearing a corset.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I've been looking at a lot of pictures of Bridget Bardot, like a young Bridget Bardot, and
Hmm.
she would often wear a very fitted top and then a very voluminous skirt. And I think it's
Hmm.
just such a pretty classic look. I know most people, when they
Hmm.
think of Bardot, they think, a little bit more 60s,
Hmm.
um, a little bit more mini skirts and mini dresses and things like that and short shorts. But um, I really like that look of her early years too. All right, the next one is peplums, which kind of goes with the return of the waist, that kind of
Hmm.
exaggerated silhouette, really emphasizing the difference between the waist and the hips. We're talking about fit and flare tops, bubble hems, drop waist peplums, gathered waistlines, all of these things that kind of give that extra oomph
Hmm.
between the waist and the hip. So I like peplums a lot. I think that they are a really nice way to incorporate that kind of structured look
Hmm.
into your tops and jackets.
Hmm.
If you don't feel like wearing a skirt or a dress. So I really like this look, and I'm glad it's making a comeback. What about you?
I like the new take on it. I think it's really fun. Um, I like how it's incorporating like a little bit more of that 80s influence. I think it's fun. The iterations I've seen have kind of played with the placement of the peplum. I think, you know, 10 years ago when peplums were really in style, they were like right on the waist.
Yeah.
And I've been seeing some at the waistline, but also some that are, more of an empire waist
Mm,
kind of peplum, things that like are a little bit more drop waist. And I think that those proportions are really fun.
yeah, they are.
I like those a lot. It's something, this is one that I'm like, I struggle to see how I would fit it personally into my
Mm.
style. Um, but I think that it'll work really well for a lot of people. It's really practical.
Yeah, it is. I used to have this top that had an elasticized sheared waist, like a
Hmm.
wide elasticized sheared waist, and then a peplum that flared out underneath. That was just a pretty like white cotton top, and I think that's a really cool look and
That's
very
cute.
wearable and very
Mhm.
comfortable. We actually have a YouTube video about adding elastic shearing. So if you
Mhm.
have a boxy top and you want to try making it with a more fitted elasticized waist and a peplum, that's a really good way to do it. And it's
Mhm.
super, super comfy at the same time. So that's a fun thing you can add into your sewing if that's something you want to try out. All right, the next trend, we've got two more before we're done. The next one, I love this one. It's an homage to Westwood. And the elements you'll see here at Westwood, we're obviously talking about Vivienne Westwood, the queen. So we've got tartan, we've got a punk influence, some historical inspired silhouettes, and then really beautiful, impeccable tailoring. And those are all hallmarks of Vivienne Westwood's designs.
Mhm.
Absolutely love Vivienne Westwood, and I love plaid. I love tartan.
Mhm.
So I think this is one that comes back every year in some form. I mean,
Mhm.
plaid, I think every fall people
Yeah.
love wearing plaid. So I think this is a good one to incorporate because it'll have a lot of longevity year
Mhm.
after year. It's great in winter too, around Christmas time. I think
Yeah.
plaid always makes a comeback at that time too.
Yeah, I think this is interesting because of I think the one of the obvious reason this trend is so many designers are wanting to pay homage to her is because she sadly passed away this year.
Hmm.
But in addition to that, again, we can see how so much of these elements that are really like the cornerstone of the brand that she created are present throughout so many
Hmm.
of these trends, from the tailoring that we've seen kind of pop up a couple times to even historical inspired silhouettes. I think
Yeah.
you can see some of that in just like the silhouettes that are becoming more popular right now.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. All right, and the last trend we wanted to talk about is probably the number one for me because it's something I wear all the time anyway, which is moody florals. So we're talking about dark florals, applique, embroidery, cross stitch, floral outerwear, which I absolutely love, floral buttons and brooches, just adding flowers everywhere.
Why not?
And I love it. I mean, I love flowers. I love flowers on everything. I love floral prints, and I especially love dark and moody floral prints. It's one of my favorite things to wear. So I absolutely am going to be all over this trend. I already have tons of fabric that's in this style that I need to use up. So very, very excited about it. What I love about moody florals is, well, I love flowers in my life. I just love flowers. And I like the kind of unexpectedness of having a very dark, kind of almost gloomy floral print. I think there's something very sexy and very, I don't know what the word is, atmospheric about it, especially in the winter, in the colder months.
I think that it like really foils the flowers really well. You know, it's kind of like how I always think that my garden looks like prettiest on kind of gloomy days.
Yeah.
It's that contrast that it lends.
Yeah, the contrast. When you see a beautiful flower against a gray sky, it's just pops so much more than seeing it against a bright blue sky. So I absolutely love this. And I like the idea of floral buttons and brooches and things like that. I remember in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, I used to wear a lot of cute like vintage enamel button or pins and things like that, brooches. And I don't know, that's kind of fun. That's a fun idea. I hadn't really thought about that in a really long time.
Yeah, I have some vintage brooches that I think I will take out for this trend. I have a beautiful hand-painted floral brooch that I think will look really good on a coat.
Yeah. I think my style now is a little bit less kitschy than it used to be. So it'll be interesting to think about how to incorporate that, and maybe maybe more fine jewelry or antique jewelry that I like to wear now versus the kind of kitschy, brightly colored vintage stuff I wore back then. So it's really fun to think about how these trends come and go, and maybe you've even incorporated them in the past, and your style has changed, and how you might evolve your own interpretation of them over time based on where you are in your life right now. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about as you look at some of these. Well, those are the trends we wanted to cover today, some of our absolute favorite trends that are coming up for the end of this year. I hope you guys have gotten some cool ideas out of this. Again, we would recommend looking at some runway shows yourself and seeing if you can spot any of these trends, get some ideas that way. I think that's a really fun thing to do. And maybe you'll find your own. Maybe you'll discover some that we didn't talk about. And if so, we would love to hear about them so you can share them on the CMARC community and let us know what you found and trends that you want to incorporate into your wardrobe. So that's it for us today. So my big takeaway from this episode, I think, just looking at all of these trends that we've talked about, I think the one that stands out to me the most, that I feel like I want to incorporate the most, would probably be the half-dressed trend, actually. Just because I feel like I have some of that in my wardrobe already, and I don't wear it as much as I would like to. So I feel like that's the most inspiring to me at the moment. Even though some of the other ones are things I already wear a lot, I feel like that one is something I want to incorporate more.
Yeah.
What about you?
Ooh. I mean, I think that the trend I gravitate towards the most is probably quiet luxury, because it aligns with my personal style the most. But that feels a little too easy. I am excited to incorporate some elements from the half-dress trend, the lingerie trend, just for like a little like fun sexiness and some layers in there.
Yeah. And it works well when you're working from home too, you know, to kind of, I don't know, keep it comfy.
Yeah.
At the same time. All about the comfort. All right. Well, we wanted to mention the style workshop, which is another thing that might help you if you're working on your own personal style and how to incorporate trends into your own wardrobe. So our style workshop is a hands-on workshop that walks you through 10 exercises that help you identify your own core style. So it's great if you're struggling with what your style really is, or you just want to whittle it down and focus it, or if you feel like your style has kind of evolved over time and you want to make sure that you have it clear in your mind, it's really, really fun to do. It's a great process to go through before you tackle any other wardrobe planning as well. And it's free for Seamwork members, but if you aren't a member, it's only $10. So very, very affordable. And again, since it's free for Seamwork members, if you want to join Seamwork, remember that podcast listeners get 50% off the annual membership at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And you can check out the style workshop at seamwork.com/go/style-workshop. So that's seamwork.com/go/style-workshop. And we'll put those links in the show notes so you can find them on our website as well. And if you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. We would super, super appreciate it. We have one today I wanted to share from Amy, and Amy says, loving summer camp. So she loves the episodes we put out for Seamwork Summer Camp. She said, this summer camp series is so fun and giving me a lot to think about. I always appreciate how insightful and kind you two are and how you deliver your messages. I'm a beginner making my way through your Learn to Sew course, which I love, by the way. Each week, your podcast reminds me how much I love my new hobby and how thankful I am that I found this wonderful podcast and community. Thank you. Oh, Amy, that's awesome. I love everything about that. Thank you so much for sharing that and taking the time to leave a review. I so appreciate when people take a few moments to let us know what they like, because it just, I don't know, it's so gratifying to me. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I think it's easy to, like, for me at least, when we're like sitting alone in a room together recording, it's easy to forget. You're like, oh, wow, like people are listening to this, and it like really like brings us back to the mission of what we do. And it's really, I'm really thankful for it.
Yes. So much gratitude. And I know also it's very easy to appreciate something. I listen to lots of podcasts and love them and forget to leave reviews. So it's very easy to forget to do that. So I really appreciate people who take the time and do that for us. It's really, really nice of you. All right. So if you want to follow us in other places, you can find us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. We mentioned, I know we mentioned at least one video in today's episode, but we're always creating really fun videos over there, sharing a lot of projects we're making and a lot of other stuff. I'm going to be doing a series pretty soon. By the time this comes out, maybe it'll be up, I don't know, on this new sewing studio that we're recording in right now. So if you are interested in sewing spaces, that's a good place to look. You can also follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And that's it for us this week. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork, or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.